cleanup of environmental hazards at the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge site is an issue that affects us all. DOE is working to address the issue, but it needs citizen input. One way you can help is to take part in the meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a volunteer citizens panel. By attending meetings, you can learn about the cleanup program and voice your opinions. Join us in making our area an even better place to live. For more information, call toll-free or visit us online.
Today I will be handling the meeting as Maggie's a little under the weather today. She came in to make sure that we had a quorum because we have a couple of recommendations and other things that we need to get under. We'll check and see if we have a quorum before we get into that. Let me remind the members that when you speak, please use the microphone. Also, the public members, I would encourage you that if you want to be recognized by the chair, please turn your name tag up. There will be a presentation, and I would like you all to prepare your questions. We'll have a question and answer period. And I don't know how Kate wants to handle it as we go on or at the end, but she'll let us know. Now, we'll have some recommendations, and as we get to one, I'll let you know it's just going to be one is an up and down vote. There's not going to be any discussions in terms of trying to wordsmith it. We can't make any changes, and it's just an up and down vote. But hopefully everybody got a copy of that, and you have read it and understand it. We'll entertain some questions. So with that, our announcements will be, our next meeting will be June 13th here. We'll have our presentation topic will be for the June meeting will be the Y12 cleanup status. And then is Sue here?
Sue's not here.
Okay.
Sue Kane is not here.
Dave, can you introduce our
Absolutely.
Our new student representative? We have two student representatives coming on board this month, and one can't be with us tonight, but Dave Adler.
Okay, Sue and Mark Whitney may be here shortly. They were running behind schedule, and if they can't get here early enough to be useful to us, they're going to go on to their next meeting and meet us next time. So normally she would prefer to do this herself, I'm sure. Okay, I'd like to welcome Sam Yar as one of the two new student representatives to the board. Sam is a rising senior at Hardin Valley Academy, where he's a member of both the National Honor Society and the National Society of High School Scholars. He volunteers at his church as a teacher and as a participant in the World Changers organization, plays in the worship band at his church. He also plans to attend the University of Tennessee after graduation and major in chemical engineering. So could we all welcome Sam to the board, please? And I guess we'll welcome Matt at the next meeting because he's not here tonight.
Right, and you'll do that. So, all right. I'd like to have some comments from our DOE representative, but she's not here. So, Dave.
I'm the best you got tonight.
Okay.
Again, apologies for Sue. She just called me a moment ago. Mark is in town doing kind of a whirlwind tour of the sites. I know that one of the last things they were going to do is to go out to the tour of the North Tower, and sometimes it takes a long time to get into and out of the North Tower. I expect that explains some of their schedule delay. The big news is that we do have a new leader for the cleanup program in Oak Ridge. His name is Mark Whitney. He will actually take the reins in August or maybe late July. and Sue will revert back to her normal job, which is serving as the deputy to the assistant manager for environmental management. A little bit about Mark. He's got a lot of experience across essentially all of the programs in DOE. He's worked for EM, he's worked for science. Most recently, he's worked for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Group. He was the executive director of the Department of Energy's Moscow office, where his responsibilities, basically in nuclear non-proliferation, what they do is they have the mission of making sure that special nuclear materials don't get into the hands of the wrong people, and that any non-secured nuclear materials are secured, generally brought back to the States and folded into peacetime use. So he's been flying around the world serving that important mission for quite a while. He does have some experience in the EM arena, and he's been a member of the Senior Executive Service for, I think, 7 years. We met with him as a group today, briefly. He seems like a really impressive guy in terms of his background and his communication skills. I think I'll let y'all develop your own opinion of him, but he strikes me as someone who's very calm, approachable, reasonable, kind of even-keeled. So I think he's going to be a welcome addition to the team in Oak Ridge. I'd also like to mention that on May 17th, we've said this before, I just want to make sure everyone remembers that this is taking place. On May 17th, we're going to have another consultation meeting on the issue of what historic preservation measures to implement at the East Tennessee Technology Park. This probably will be the last consultation meeting held on that subject. We've held quite a few. The process has gone on for a very long time. It does need to come to closure, but we felt that one more meeting was a sensible proposal because we recently received the National Park Service report, which we discussed at the last meeting. It's a consultation meeting. The board representatives, the SSAB is one of the consulting parties to the process, so invites have been sent to the SSAB to attend. But it's open to the public, so anybody that's interested in the issue can show up and listen. There will be anyone that wants directions on the who, what, and when can contact me, but the basics are it's taking place in the building that I work in, the yellow barracky-looking building across from the Federal Building, on the 17th, beginning at 8:30, I believe, in the G Wing. It'll be pretty obvious where it is because that'll be the room, the building that all the people are flocking into. No special IDs will be required to get in. If you have a picture ID and show it to the guard, we've made special arrangements that people don't need the normal passes to get into the Federal Building. The format for the meeting will involve Sue welcoming the group, telling people what the status of the project is. Then we're going to quickly turn it over to the National Park Service to allow them to speak for a while about their assessment of the situation and their thoughts on how best to commemorate the important history out at the ETTP site. Then I will talk for a while about what DOE had proposed and what changes we were making to our proposal to respond to all the comments that we had received on that proposal, including the comments received from the National Park Service. And then we're just going to talk amongst the consulting parties for a while. I'm unclear if yet. We'll decide soon if there's going to be a broader public comment period. Strictly speaking, the 106 process involves the assimilation of formal consulting parties and allowing them to talk. Historically, our practice has been to allow other members to offer thoughts too. We'll see how the leadership wants to handle that. That's about it for me this month.
Okay, thank you, Dave. We'll hear from our EPA representative, Connie Jones.
Thank you. I don't have any specific announcements. What I would like to say that I toured the site, specifically the K1070B remedial action. It's complete. And also looked at the K33 slab and soils removal. It's about 1/4 complete. So progress is happening at the ETTP site. I'll be more than happy to attempt to answer questions if asked.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Next, our TDEC liaison, John Owsley.
Thank you, sir. I too have no announcements to make, but would be glad to attempt to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, John. Next, I'll call on Ron Murphy for a public comment period.
The public comment period is now open. According to the sign-in sheet, we don't have anyone signed up, but if there's any members of the public that wish to make comments, they will stand to be recognized, and if they'll move to the microphone that we've provided for you. And we ask that you keep your comments to a limit of 3 minutes. Someone who needs no introduction, I think. Mr. Mulvannon.
I'm Norman Mulvannon. I'm the Vice Chair of the Citizens Oversight Panel. There are two things that are going to happen here in the next couple of weeks. One of them, of course, is the one that was just mentioned, the consulting party meeting, and I really encourage everybody to go to this. It's a real education. I've been to every one of them here in Oak Ridge. I'm really educated. And so I really encourage everybody to take the opportunity, if you can, to get away from work or get away from your house or something like that and go down there. I'm going to be there. And I think that's about it today. I encourage everybody to listen very carefully to the presentation this evening. I think it's going to be interesting. We haven't had one of these in a while, and I think it's very important that you understand the position of the Site Civic Advisory Board in relation to the rest of the organization. Thank you very much.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to address the board? I see no other volunteers. The public comment period is now closed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ron. Dave?
I'm sorry. I forgot one thing I need to mention. On May 26th, I'm going to be taking new members on a tour of the reservation, the normal orientation tour. That's the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. Sorry about that. Apparently that's the only time that could work for people, so I just adjusted to what can work for other people. If we take a van, which we do have access to, we can take extra people. Well, look who showed up. And so if there are others who are interested in participating, we can do that. So if anybody else wants to go see it for a second time, just contact Spencer. We'll be meeting at 9 a.m. at the New Hope Center on May 26th. I'm sorry, May 26th.
Thank you. Sue, thank you.
Thank you, Edward. Hello, everyone. We apologize for being a few minutes late, but wanted to come over tonight.
I got lost coming back from the airport. So.
Mark got a little twisted around, but anyway, we apologize for being late. I don't know if you all heard, but I presume that you did, that Mr. Mark Whitney, who is currently with the National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA, will be coming to Oak Ridge at the beginning of August to take over as the manager of the Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management. So Mark came down today to start his transition, and I thought that it was fortuitous that you all had your board meeting tonight and that we might come by just for a few minutes because we have another engagement at 6:45 in Knoxville to introduce him and to introduce yourselves and let him say a few words. So Mark?
First of all, I apologize for being late. I really did get lost coming back from the airport, and apologize for interrupting your meeting. But thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to working with you when I get down here. I keep saying I really wish I could start now, because when you find out about a new job and you come down and visit and there's such great people and such a great mission, you don't want to wait. But I will be down late July, early August to start working with Sue and the team, and had a great day today out at the site. And so I don't want to take a lot of time from your meeting, but I just wanted to introduce myself and say thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I don't know if, Kate, are you familiar with Mark? And
we haven't met, no. Hi, Mark. I'm
Kate
Kate
Brennan.
Alexander. And I'm from, from D.C., from the D.C. office, yeah. Yeah, here to talk about the Federal Advisory Committee Act.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
good.
Kate's
Okay.
making the presentation tonight.
Oh, good, okay.
well,
So
with
Dr.
that,
Nice to meet you.
with that, let me introduce Kate Alexander to the rest of the board. It says here in her bio that this has got to be a mistake. It says has worked for 30 years. She's not quite 30. Are you 30 yet, Kate? Thank you. See, years in communication and public outreach, and is currently the designated federal officer for EM and for the Site-Specific Advisory Board. It's not only this board, all the other ones across the complex. And she previously served as a communications director of the U.S. National Nanotechnology Coordination Office. And she began her career as a news producer and writer at WJLA TV in Washington, D.C., and she worked in media relations at the American Association for Advancement of Science and at the Washington Gas. She graduated Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Michigan with a BA in Literature, Science, and Arts, and completed graduate work at Johns Hopkins University. Let's welcome Kate Alexander.
Thank you for having me here. I'm very happy to be here and to talk about federal advisory committees. Just as I was looking over my slides and coming from another meeting on presentations, I started thinking, gee, you know, this looks like a lot of legalese and such. So I'm going to try not to do that. I once had a, one of those career tests. What are your strengths? What are your skills? What would you be good at? And a lawyer came up as something that they said I'd be good at, but the counselor said, and you'd hate it. So just so you know, I do have to do this as part of my job. It is, and generally I enjoy it, but I don't see my role as terribly legalistic, and I don't think that the requirements on members is highly legalistic, at least in terms of how you practice and how you interact with each other, which is really, I think, the spirit of FACA, which is the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and so we'll talk more about that spirit as well as the letter of the law as we go forward. First of all, some fun things, I hope. Just so you know that you are part of a much larger group of citizens who contribute their time and advice to the federal government. There are 450,000 members of advisory committees across the federal agencies. So, and you are on one of almost, 250 boards, and among a large number of what are called non-scientific committees, although you might dispute that this is a non-scientific committee. But what they mean generally by that is that it is not an appointed expert committee where there is a requirement for scientific expertise. And now a few trivia questions, and we'll see if anybody knows their advisory board history. Anybody have an idea of what was the first Federal Advisory Board? No? No one's ever heard that one? George Washington appointed the first Federal Advisory Board during the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay, longest running Federal Advisory Board. Any guess? Same one? That's good. No, it's not. It's Department of Defense. Their West Point Visitors Center. That advisory board was created in 1815. And finally, the agency with the greatest number of advisory committees. Hint, it's not DOE. Anybody? It's Health and Human Services. And they have a lot. I hate to say this in this environment of, too much government. I don't want you to get it wrong. They have a lot of programs that affect a lot of different people. They have 263 advisory committees at Health and Human Services. At DOE, there are now 11. There is actually a ceiling on the number of advisory boards that are allowed under DOE policy, and I think it's 12, so I think there's one opening right now. What about the EM program? Anybody have an idea how many EM advisory boards there are?
8 plus 1, I think.
What?
8 plus 1?
Well, the EMSSAB is considered one board. It has one charter. So all of the local boards are chartered under that one EMSSAB. Ron got it. There are two. It's the EMSSAB and the Environmental Management Advisory Board, which is considered an expert board that looks at corporate issues and reports to the Assistant Secretary. John's on that board. You are, aren't you? So you know that well. Yeah. Okay. All right. The Federal Advisory Committee Act, a lot of people talk about it. I have to say some, not always with our understanding anyway, of the Federal Advisory Committee. It is something that gets the attention of Congress in almost every session. There's a new piece of legislation introduced. Every year people think they're getting closer and closer, but it tends to get burdened with a lot of other riders. So one hasn't been passed in a while. Primarily they have to do with openness and providing greater openness in advisory committee matters. The executive branch has people who look at the functioning of the advisory boards from the General Services Administration, which has responsibility within the executive branch for how the advisory boards operate. The General Accounting Office does the investigations. They are actually finishing up a report of which DOE was one of the agencies that they were looking at, so they were looking closely at our boards. We should hear about that soon. And of course, the agencies themselves that have the responsibility to ensure that the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and I'll say FACA from now on, you know what I'm saying there, is implemented as intended. The integrity of the advisory committees depends a lot on the members, and that is how the members conduct themselves in the group, if they are welcoming of the public and thus create an atmosphere of openness, and how members conduct themselves on a regular basis in terms of their position, and that is that in the whole area of ethics, if you use the name of the board without the permission of the board, things like that can compromise the integrity. So we're going to talk a little bit more about member responsibilities as we go forward. Just a few things that we're going to, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. What's in the law and how is it practically implemented? How it matters to members, and then also headquarters, how headquarters views the EMSSAB. Let me get to Ed's point earlier on questions. If there's a clarifying question that you have, I'm very happy to answer it as we go along. We can have time for general questions, I think, at the end. Okay. FACA was enacted in 1972 but effected in 1973. It established the GSA office to oversee the federal advisory committees, and it established a framework for federal advisory committees and how they operate, membership, things like that. The word framework is very important. If you've ever read the unannotated law of FACA, I think it's, 6 pages maybe? It is not long. So if you're ever interested, you know, take a look. It's truly a framework, and it's not the only controlling document or authorities under which the boards operate. In fact, it's skeletal in many respects, some high-level concepts, but not a whole lot more. The drivers for the Federal Advisory Committee Act was, the main one was to move away from the smoke-filled rooms that were supposedly the places where a lot of policy was discussed in Washington, D.C. in particular. It was to control who had access to the federal agencies in advisory-type capacities. In fact, the Federal Advisory Committee Act is used whenever a group of non-federal employees are convened for the purpose of giving consensus advice to the agency. Okay, so you can have meetings, you can have, people can come in, of course, and they can talk with executives, officials, and present their individual views, or, maybe it's a one-on-one, something like that. But when you convene to give consensus advice, as you are convened, it's another matter. The Federal Advisory Committee Act is triggered. Part of that, too, was apparently at the time there was a proliferation of advisory committees, and there was no mechanism for evaluating them and the amount of money that was spent on them. So those were the two drivers. Generally, this is what FACA accomplishes. It allows public input on government decisions. It gives a framework for that. In requiring balance on membership, it prevents domination by special interests, and of course provides forums for open discussions of policy. There are 4 ways that federal advisory committees can be created. This is kind of legalistic here, but just in case you wondered, Congress can require an agency to set up a committee. They can set up their own as well. They can authorize a committee's creation, and that means it's the agency would have, permission in a sense to do that, but they don't have to do it. The agencies themselves can decide to create advisory committees, and the president creates advisory committees, and in fact has quite a number of them as well. I don't have the exact number right now. Okay, here's the skeleton we were telling you about, or the framework's probably a more flattering term, for FACA's requirements. It requires the agencies to set up management systems, administrative guidance, and controls for their boards. So if you look across agencies, they're going to be different. They're not the same controls, the same administrative requirements are not in place. This is really important because it gives the agencies responsibility for setting up a system that supports the law, as opposed to, the law imposing the system on the agency. Committees must be chartered every 2 years. The EMSSAB is chartered every 2 years. We have to provide an assessment of the value of the advisory committees to the agency and whether we think they should continue. Every 2 years that happens. We just went through that process recently. Those are just a few of the other things that FACA says. Importantly, it doesn't say how to do them. Again, that's an agency. And neither does it say how to balance the committees. Different people at different points in time may have different ideas about what constitutes balance, but it requires balance and doesn't say much more about that. But other authorities do say more about that. This is the structure in which we operate. The law and the implementing regulations, which is the Code of Federal Regulations 41. Now that's called the FACA Final Rule. All of these subsequent, all of the smaller circles in that diagram are increasingly more specific. And that's important because all of them, all of the DOE manual, which is the committee management manual, the EMSSAB charter, its guidance, and the site bylaws, your bylaws here, for instance, all have to conform with the superseding authorities. But you can be more specific than those authorities, where those authorities are silent and you're working within the structure. Does that make sense? Is that clear? And on the issue of balance, every one of these gets more specific than FACA did. Okay, Code of Federal Regulations, that's the CFR 41. And I didn't know this was happening. Tells us to consider a cross-section of those directly affected. So when we look at local board membership, what we're looking at is what is the affected area? Who are the affected peoples affected by the agency cleanup, as well as potential contamination? And the sites pretty much do that. They define what is the affected area, what they would consider to be the affected area. Okay, again, this is part of the CFR. Start getting into the more demographics of the area to find some balance there. DOE gets more specific on membership composition and how the members will or they serve without compensation. For instance, balance of interest, again, same words. And the EMSSAB guidance starts getting more specific of all of these. There have been some additional input on what balance is from the GAO, from the National Research Council. The National Research Council encouraged the agencies to look at sub-communities, not just large groups, but look at groups within groups. And GSA assumes that we can constantly improve our balance, and thus every time we have to get a charter renewed or a new board is chartered, how that board is going to be balanced or how that balance is going to be improved on that board has to be reported to GSA. So big, very, very complicated, and it is subjective, the concept of guidance. There are no rules. They don't say you have to have 2 of this kind of people, 2 of that kind of people. Pretty much, depending on the function of the board, the agency must create an appropriate balance framework for that board.
Kate?
Yeah.
Does it, in some way, does it dictate the number of members on the board? Because each site has a different number of members. Is that
each site does have a different number of members within the EMSSAB. And pretty much that's what the site has indicated is appropriate in terms of the interests that they get and in terms of the ability of a cross-section of the community to be represented. And you see smaller boards often at smaller sites or sites that are winding down in terms of the cleanup mission when they have less, there are less areas for input. The DOE manual does say that the boards should have the fewest number of members as is necessary to fulfill the mission. So they're looking, they're thinking, keep it small. And again, a lot of it has to do with just wanting to be sure that the boards are productive, effective, that everybody is fulfilling a membership, their membership duties within that. Is that okay? Okay. You know what your site recruitment process is, so I don't think I have to go into that. What you might not know is that after applications come in, recruitment efforts bring in people who are interested, and whatever input takes place on a site level, Nominations are sent to headquarters, and there's quite an elaborate review process that takes place. And primarily, what is being looked at, and you can see all of the, and those are just some of them. There are actually more offices in that bottom next to the last bullet. EM 3.2 is our office, which is now called the Office of, I have to remember it, it's brand new. We are Intergovernmental and Community Activities. That's what we are now. The Committee Management Office is a DOE-wide office. They oversee all of the advisory committees within the Executive Secretariat. That's where that office is located. General Counsel plays a big role. The EM Front Office, the Assistant Secretary's office, plays a big role. It goes to the Deputy Secretary. It now also goes to Secretary Chu's office. There are people within that office who will also look at it. So there's quite a review. The final step in that is the appointment letters are sent from the Office of the Assistant Secretary. Let me say what they're looking for. Primarily what they're looking for is balance and the absence of any conflicts of interest. The site submits information that shows what segments of the community are represented, both in terms of residents, where people live. When we're talking about affected peoples, our board, the EMSSAB, is often looking at who's represented here in terms of the various residential areas surrounding the site or potentially affected. But we're also looking at where do people work? What are their community affiliations? We look at demographics for the area are important as well. So there is a great deal of care that's given to making sure that we have balance, that we can defend the balance of our boards. The secretary of every agency that has boards is on the hook for compliance. And it's not a long chain here. The Secretary Chu is responsible for all of the boards within the agencies to work within the law. Furthermore, they're required, the secretary is responsible for ensuring that they operate by their own rules. So my understanding from the lawyers is that when the court cases have been ruled against the agency, it's generally been because they haven't followed their own rules. So that, I think, for all of you, it gives you an indication of how important the EMSSAB guidance and charter, as well as the DOE policy manual, is. And again, it's because FACA and even the implementing regulations are, they direct you, they tell you what is wanted, what the goals and objectives are, but they don't tell the agencies how to do it. The agencies have to come up with their own. Okay, I want to go quickly here now. All right, your member responsibilities. You have a good board. You have, I think you have a good team at DOE that's pretty good about communicating responsibilities of members, and give you the support that you need to be a productive member. So these are your requirements, basically. They are within the EMSSAB guidance now and within the local bylaws of what's expected. And the local bylaws may be more specific. And again, that's okay. They can be more specific, not less. Another important one is to declare any potential conflict of interest. People with conflicts of interest are not necessarily precluded from being on the board, but they do have to be recused from discussions where their conflicts could arise. One of the issues with conflicts of interest is that you need to weigh how much someone actually would have to remove themselves from board activities, and if it's a lot, then why would you appoint them? Right? You want people who can participate very fully. There has to be a pretty compelling reason in terms of them representing another group that your board needs for balance to appoint someone with a conflict of interest. Okay. All right, so here's some questions for you and some things that you may or may not know. Sometimes there have been these discussions on local boards and sometimes there haven't. Do you all know what to do if press calls? What if somebody gives you from the Knoxville newspaper, and I don't know the name of it. What is it?
News Sentinel.
News Sentinel.
Frank
Munger. I know Frank. Okay. So if you get a call and are asked a question about activities on the board, do you know what to do? What would you do? That's really a site you do know, Ed? All right, what would you do?
I would refer him to my chairman or to the designated spokesperson.
Uh-huh. Generally, the local boards do have a designated spokesperson in the chair, and the chair is the only one who's authorized to speak on behalf of the board. And even then, the chairs are, need to be careful that they separate their own opinions from something that the board has been on record for. But it is a site-specific issue. Sometimes, a conversation with DOE is required. I don't know how you do it here, but email exchanges, they are FOIA-able. Federal information, the federal, what am I saying? Information Act, FOIA. Anyway, in terms of board proceedings, they could be, you should assume that they could be public. May not be, may never have need to be. You should assume that, however. Okay, how subcommittees operate. I often have used Oak Ridge as an example of a really good, having a very, I think, well-functioning subcommittee structure, especially in terms of ensuring that all of the key issues are brought to the full board. Because if it pertains to a recommendation, all of the salient issues that the board would need to make a decision on that, including minority-type reports and comments, should come to the full board. So the board has the benefit of the subcommittee deliberations. So I saw that happen in my first visit here, so I'm assuming you are all continuing to excel in that area. All right. DOE has responsibilities for you to fund the boards adequately, to inform members of their responsibilities, to ensure that the boards practice openly and with inclusiveness, to ensure balance. That's an interesting thing that people don't often realize, I think, is that, and in fact, I've heard people say, well, it's the agency. The advice is going to the agency. How can the agency be the one to ensure balance? I mean, aren't they going to put people on the board who, are going to say what they want to hear? That is a criticism that we know takes place. However, it is the agency's responsibility to ensure that a wide diversity of views is represented on the board. And if called into question, DOE is responsible for that balance. So, that line of responsibility is very clear. And once the board is appointed, once the board members are appointed, it's DOE's responsibility to get out of the way in terms of recommendations. DOE is supposed to give information as requested, any support that's requested, however, is not supposed to be involved in the recommendation making process. That's a board responsibility. All right. One final thing. I think this is one final thing. The EMSSAB is chartered as a representative board. It is not chartered as an expert board. And all federal advisory boards have to be chartered as one or the other. And representative means that, well, it tells you right there. The members are associated with an identifiable group. It can be an area, for instance, as often is the case with the EMSSAB. An expert is, well, there is a legal definition for it. That's what it is. Even that is somewhat subjective. But I think it's often common sense, although sometimes maybe not. I really recently, we got an application for one of the boards, not yours, for someone with a PhD in nuclear science and 40 years in the nuclear field. And when we said, that's an expert, you know, why are you appointing? Does this person represent another facet of the community where you need balance? Because very clearly this person is an expert and cannot be appointed because he is an expert. And the response I got was, oh, really, the board doesn't see him as a subject matter expert. Like, really? It was just simply not credible. It would not hold out. That person was an expert, and that person was not appointed as a result of that. But this is an important concept. It's important to this board in particular because there are people on the board, as you know, that have a lot of technical expertise, and they do offer, I think, a lot. I think many people do appreciate them, but they also represent other community interests. And I also have to say that when boards are dominated by people with especially very deep technical backgrounds, the whole dynamic changes. The discussions no longer are accessible to people without that kind of background. So it's something that we have to pay close attention to first of all, continue to have non-technical people interested in being a part of the board and to feel that they can contribute to the board as well. All right. Let me just close with the view of the environmental management is that the EMSSAB, the 8 local boards of the EMSSAB are very valuable. We do a compilation of recommendations that the local sites have found to be particularly valuable, and we share those with senior management so they are aware of what the local boards are doing, and we'll continue to do that. And that's it. Any questions?
Kate did a quick presentation on this at the chairs meeting at Paducah, and in it you did a little timeline about the time that it takes once you get to the time. I think the board would be interested in hearing that.
Okay. Yeah, what Dave's talking about is we were looking at questions about the length of time it takes from the recruitment process to getting the letter of appointment, and everyone understands that it does take some time, and from the list of offices that it goes through after it leaves the site, you can see why it might do that, why it might take some time. But we are very aware of needing to move them along. We try to do that, and most of the sites move through fairly quickly once they get to headquarters. I think the average is about 40 days, so that's really pretty good when you consider all the eyes that are on it.
40 days
is the average time. Once it hits,
once
the official submission hits headquarters. There is a draft phase, and there's back and forth between the site and our office and getting it into shape so that it'll sail. That's what we want. We want to resolve any issues that are glaring to us before it gets in the process, where it could get hung up and have to come back, and then it would take longer.
Connie?
Could I have a follow-up real quick here? When you get from here, from one of the local DOE sites, do you just get raw applications, or do they have anointments on it telling why they feel that these people fall within the lines of being a viable member? And also, if there's 3 openings on a board, do you get just 3 names, or do you get 6 names to pick from?
Good questions. We get both the applications and the site's determination of where they see them as representative and bringing representation to the board. We rely on the sites for that, to make that determination. They usually have had interaction with you and know that better than we would, but we do use the applications to check them and to see, in particular, if the support for the designation of a community interest, for instance, is supported, if it's evident in that. So we do look, yeah. The second question.
Number of applications.
Oh, yeah.
For vacancies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the site makes the nominations. So they send they send the number.
Okay. Connie? Oh, you went straight.
Yeah, just following up on what Dave asked. Do you see any information about potential board members other than what's in the package, like a background check or anything like that?
We do not. We do see the applications again, so we do see that. There have been times when someone in that chain has known someone who's come through and has looked further for what they might have been involved in. Once there was someone who had a criminal background once whose application came in, and that was flagged not by us but by someone else who was familiar with that. So, but no, not on a routine basis. Mm-hmm.
Steve?
I'm not sure there's an answer to this, but this board is 22 voting members and 2 students. We meet monthly. We consider ourselves, I think, fairly proactive. And people are quite dedicated in their contribution of personal time to the board. I think it's probably the only experience that most of us have ever had with regard to federally appointed advisory board. How does our activity compare to other boards that you're aware of, not only the EM SSABs, but other boards within DOE? Are we larger, smaller, more active, less active, more aggressive, less aggressive? What?
As a whole, you're talking about the whole of the EM SSAB?
Yes.
You are the largest board within DOE.
You mean the entire SSAB?
The entire SSAB, yes. And I have to say, I am not familiar with a great many of the other boards in terms of the number of recommendations, for instance, that they give. But those that I am, I especially because you're talking about 8 boards, the EMSSAB is very active. And there is a website, I think it's just, let me send it to you so you can look up the reports. It's called the FACA database, and GSA maintains it. We have to submit every year a report of the number of meetings held, the number of members, the number of recommendations, how many were accepted or rejected. That's an annual reporting requirement that we have, and it's on the website. It's on a website, so you can find it. Let me send Melissa the URL to that, so you can look yourself and see how many recommendations, for instance, are generated by other boards. That's not always the greatest indicator of activity. In fact, I think I know of one instance where a board made that a goal, generating a lot of recommendations. The quality matters a lot, so that's not always the best measure. But the EMSSAB is very highly regarded within DOE. We are, I think, in terms of our membership packages are thought to be very complete, and good review, good analysis of the requirements and how we meet them. So that's some feedback I can give you anyway. Does that answer your question, Steve?
Yes, to some degree, honing in more specifically on this board right here.
Mm-hmm.
What observation do you have with regard to our activity versus the other EMSSAB subboards, if you will?
Okay. Let me say that when, and this happens a lot, or I shouldn't say a lot, but it happens with some frequencies, that we're asked, okay, if I'm going to look at a board's activities and their recommendations, which one would you recommend? And we say Oak Ridge. We see you as a very highly functioning, very thoughtful, considerate board that provides good, solid advice in areas that management thinks is valuable. That's I didn't talk about evaluation, but part of the evaluation that we do and we'd like to do more of is looking at what we see is really the three main groups for evaluation, and that is the members. Do the members feel valued? Do they feel that they are heard, and that the process works for them? Members of the community. Does the community know about the board? Do they know about the board's work? Do they find it a place where they can go and express their opinions as well? And DOE management is really the third that we can evaluate, because part of the Federal Advisory Committee process is making sure that what the committee is working on is of value to the federal government. So if somebody's off doing something that an agency has said has not given as an area where they really want public input, it may be a total waste of time. Maybe something that is not even being looked at the moment. So all of those three groups are very important to evaluation of the functioning of any of the boards. And again, from our perspective anyway, this is a very high-functioning, valuable board. And I know you weren't fishing, so I just have to tell you, it's true.
Thank you. Now, Connie.
Thank you. I just have one question. And on slide 14, you talked about the factors that have to be considered in terms of making up the board from the fact and the charter and all. One of the things that I was wondering to what degree you can answer this, and you may not be able to answer to the specificity that maybe I'm looking for, but regarding the Federal Facility Environmental Restoration and Dialogue Committee, which sets up how, some of the decisions made regarding cleanup, and understand that you can't make people apply, but how much do you stress that with the boards when they're seeking vacancies in terms of trying to make sure that the makeup is representative of the community, specifically regarding the Dialogue Committee recommendations?
I don't know how to answer that. The dialogue has continued with EPA, and EPA recently invited the Department.
Cleanup of environmental hazards at the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge site is an issue that affects us all. DOE is working to address the issue, but it needs citizen input. One way you can help is to take part in the meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a volunteer citizens panel. By attending meetings, you can learn about the cleanup program and voice your opinions. Join us in making our area an even better place to live. For more information, call toll-free or visit us online.